Good morning. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Thanks to Len and Pam for helping me co-facilitate these sessions, and also want to thank Alberto, who's led the Knight Foundation for 18 years, has been so incredibly generous to helping us continue to exist. Very quickly, before we begin the session, it will be broadcast via Zoom, and the video link for replay will be available on knightcommission.org by tomorrow morning. Commission members and panelists should use the microphones when speaking, because several of our commissioners are participating via Zoom, and we're pleased to have the media and others participating via Zoom to hear this discussion. The slides shown during this session and other meeting resources will be available at knightcommission.org. And the media will have a press conference with you at 12:30. I'll stop there and turn it over to Len.
There we go. It works. Thanks, Arnie. Today's session will examine the pressing challenges facing college sports leaders and a unique opportunity we believe university presidents, athletics directors, and conference commissioners now have to put big revenue college sports on a better path. We want to welcome our three distinguished experts who will join us in the discussion today. First, we'll have Damon Evans, the Barry P. Gossett Director of Athletics at the University of Maryland, College Park. Kevin White, Vice President, Director of Athletics Emeritus, and Professor of Practice at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. Both of them have extensive experience leading athletics programs at the Football Bowl Subdivision level and have served in many national leadership roles. And our third panelist is Kelly Fagan, partner of sports law and higher education at the Church, Hiddle, and Antrim law firm. Kelly co-authored an independent report provided to the Knight Commission in May of 2021 on the Title IX implications of the Commission's proposed new governing entity for the sport of FBS football. She'll summarize some of those key findings during this discussion. So welcome to you all. And before we turn the discussion over to our expert panelists to make their initial remarks, we have a brief presentation to outline the key findings from the Knight Commission's recent report and the solutions the Commission has offered. This information will help frame this discussion. Sandy?
One of the Knight Commission's strategic priorities has been to provide public transparency to where the money goes and where the money comes from in college sports. On the horizon, a small subset of schools will receive new and uncommitted annual revenue that is projected to exceed more than $1 billion from an expanded 12-team college football playoff and more lucrative conference media rights agreements. It is critical to understand the potential impact of this influx of billions if the well-established spending practices continue and there are no policy changes. We commissioned financial services firm CLA to model a future financial landscape for the coming decade for public FBS athletic programs that will benefit exclusively from the new CFP revenues. CLA's analysis used actual athletics revenue and expense data reported by institutions along with new projected media revenue. The projected flood of new money can either exacerbate the many challenges leaders now face or help produce solutions to these challenges. I'll turn it over to Knight Commission Managing Director for Strategic Initiatives, Sandy Hatfield-Clubb, to review the key findings from the CLA analysis, and Knight Commission CEO Amy Perko to review related solutions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan mentioned the new and uncommitted annual revenue that is projected to exceed more than $1 billion from an expanded 12-team college football playoff and more lucrative conference media rights agreements. This slide provides some perspective on what is projected to happen within the next few years. It is estimated that by 2027, the CFP will generate somewhere between 1.7 and 2 billion annually in gross revenue, an amount that could even double the entire NCAA budget. As the slide shows, the CFP distribution to FBS schools only will dwarf the annual NCAA distribution to more than 350 Division I schools. CLA used institutionally reported data to conduct an assessment of historical trends of actual revenues and operating expenses across FBS public institutions. The revenue projections include an annual increase of more than $1 billion from the CFP expansion and increasing media contracts in the autonomy conferences. The CLA analysis shows that if the current spending patterns continue, the cost spiral with football coaching compensation and severance payouts will accelerate. CLA discovered a problematic crossover point that we will later explain in this presentation. CLA ran expense projections across several categories. We will focus on two of them in this presentation. The first category is expenses for all college athletes across all sports at public FBS schools. These expenses include all components of athletic scholarships, which, as you know, includes housing, meals, in addition to tuition and fees. These expenses also include cost of attendance stipends and all medical expenses and medical insurance premiums. The second category is football coaching salaries and benefits for 11 countable coaches at each FBS public school. This category includes coaches' compensation, bonuses, and all related benefits that are part of the institution's contract. Of note, this does not include severance pay, since severance is reported by institutions in another expense category. The CLA projections demonstrate that public FBS Autonomy 5 schools will spend nearly $1.4 billion on the compensation expenses for 594 head and assistant football coaches. That's only $9 million less than they're projected to spend on athletic scholarships, cost of attendance stipends, and medical expenses and benefits for more than 30,000 athletes across all of their sports at those same 54 public universities. The CLA analysis revealed that in FY 2022, 9 of the 51 FBS Autonomy 5 public schools spent more compensating 11 football coaches than they spent on all expenses detailed under the athlete scholarships and medical expenses for all athletes across all of their sports. This is the concerning crossover point discovered in the analysis. If spending patterns continue in the projected growth rates, nearly half of the public schools in those conferences will have reached this same crossover point in 2032. Now I will turn it over to Amy to talk about solutions.
Thanks, Sandy. If college athletics is committed to the education, health, safety, and success of college athletes, and a financial model that reflects these priorities, these projections should be concerning. These projections, and frankly some of the practices we've seen, show a model that is out of whack. The Knight Commission has a history of studying and designing solutions to lead transformational change that prioritizes athletes' education, health, safety, and success, as well as achieving equity across the board. The next series of slides highlight the Knight Commission's proposed roadmap to reset priorities and build a better model in 3 key areas: alignment and accountability, the use of money, and incentives. The financial structure and the governance of college sports must be aligned. The Knight Commission solutions address the current misalignment of the CFP and the NCAA with regard to their roles, responsibilities, and FBS football revenues. In December of 2020, our commission proposed a new and separate governing structure for the sport of FBS football, dubbed on this slide the National College Football Association. This entity would govern all aspects of the sport of FBS football funded by the CFP. The NCAA would continue, as it does now, to govern all sports other than FBS football and operate its national championships for those sports. This option, with a different and unified governing structure for FBS football, has growing support from FBS athletic directors and football coaches and is more timely than ever. The Knight Commission has long championed as well the importance of adding independent directors to all governing boards. This important feature in our proposal addresses the self-interest that dominates the competitive nature of college sports in governance decisions and provides objective oversight. We believe that these boards should include medical experts and current and former athletes with a legitimate voice in the governance process. The Division I board and the CFP board can act now to add independent directors to their current structures. At a minimum, this slide outlines some steps we think should be made within the current governance. And at a minimum, we offer a solution to align the financial accountability with the current system of NCAA governance through two actions that could be taken now. The first action aligns CFP revenues with national expenses for the sport of FBS football, expenses that are currently absorbed by the NCAA using March Madness revenues. Instead, if CFP revenues funded these national expenses, including the cost of enforcement, insurance, and litigation, this would free up NCAA funds to be reallocated. Lead One estimated these annual costs at more than $60 million. Additionally, the NCAA revenue distribution formula should change to be consistent with its bylaws that state only NCAA championship sports are counted in the distribution. Since the FBS football championship is not an NCAA championship, it should not count in the NCAA's formula. The Independent College Football Playoff conducts the national championship for the sport of football, FBS football, and makes decisions on all CFP revenue. This simple change would result in another $61 million becoming available for the NCAA to distribute. These two changes could result in a combined $120 million for redistribution annually to Division I members. The second area where changes are needed is the critical area of how the money is used, aligning spending with core values. The Knight Commission's report, Connecting Athletic Revenues with the Educational Model of College Sports, fittingly dubbed the CARE model, was released in September 2021, and today it is increasingly more relevant. This CARE model requires shared revenues are tethered to the educational purpose with a special emphasis on the core principles highlighted here on this slide: transparency, independent oversight, gender equity, broad-based sports opportunities, and financial responsibility for education, health, and safety. Our in-depth report lays out a conference-based approach to provide greater accountability for spending shared athletic revenues on education-centric priorities. With the CARE model report, you will find examples of bold and innovative conference-based approaches that Division I leaders can use to regulate spending and demonstrate the principle of financial responsibility. For example, as outlined on this slide, a conference could require schools to use at least 50% of shared athletic revenues to directly support athlete education, health, safety, and well-being. Other examples detailed in our report include ways individual conferences can legally regulate excessive coaching salaries. Consistent with this financial principle, the CFP has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to earmark a significant portion of its new and uncommitted revenue to directly benefit college athletes' education, health, safety, and well-being. The final set of solutions emphasize the need to change NCAA incentives to align them with the NCAA constitutional principles. Our commission believes that any financial incentives a governing board entity awards should support gender and racial equity and broad-based opportunities. First, if a national governing body provides incentives for athletics performance, it must reward for the performance of men's and women's teams. Second, college sports can do more to close racial equity gaps through our proposed racial equity filter in the NCAA's academic performance program. And finally, to incentivize athlete opportunities, one of the core values, a new category within the revenue distribution could be created to provide escalating rewards to schools with more than the median number of sports. Each of the Knight Commission solutions that we've outlined here today have been well researched and, more importantly, are grounded in the principles and values of college sports. All of our reports, including our most recent covering the financial projections through 2032, are available on our website, knightcommission.org. I'm pleased now to turn it back to Lynn Elmore as we transition to our expert panelists.
Thank you, Amy, Sandy, and Jonathan, for the informative presentation. Right now, it's time for us to hear from our panelists for their remarks and their reactions. We'll start with Damon, followed by Kelly, and then Kevin. And after remarks, we'll hopefully get some questions and answers going.
Thank you, Lynn, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. I'm surprised that I'm going before Kevin. We got a living legend sitting next to us, so he should have been first. But these are interesting and challenging times that we face in intercollegiate athletics. And when I first saw this report by the Knight Commission, I must admit it was somewhat alarming and staggering to take a look at the numbers and see how they kind of align, to know that we're spending that much money as it relates to the sport of college football. I do think that while we have a lot of challenges within our industry, it does give us a great opportunity to reposition ourselves. I do believe as we continue to move forward, we have to keep education at the forefront. I am a former student athlete and had the opportunity to participate in college athletics at the University of Georgia, and what has allowed me to sit here before you is the education that I earned at those institutions. But now as we continue to move to this evolution of the business side of intercollegiate athletics, some people say you can have one or the other. I do believe that you can have both here. What I'm concerned about as I continue to see what we do, sitting in rooms, whether it be those of us that are ADs, presidents, or those that are guiding intercollegiate athletics, a lot of times we'll say one thing, but our actions are much different. We understand that we have the challenges of paying out coaches. We understand that we're bringing in big dollars, significant revenue. I'm a part of a conference that just signed a $1 billion media rights agreement, I think the largest ever in the history of intercollegiate athletics. We just add more fodder for the student athletes to say, where is ours? Where do we get our share from? So when I take a look at what the Knight Commission is proposing as it relates to the National College Football Association, there's some things about it I do like. I do like the fact the care model. The care model in and of itself gets back to the educational piece of it. I do like the fact that we needed to take a hard look at equity from a gender equity standpoint as well as a racial equity standpoint. But I am a little bit hesitant because what does that mean as it relates to this thought of, well, if we're going to be the ones that are running the College Football Association or National College Football Association, would some come back and say, then why not take basketball and have those institutions come up with a tournament? And if those institutions, and I'm saying the quote-unquote Autonomy 5 or Power 5, are going to be held responsible for some litigation out there called House, then there are going to be some, if we're going to pay the freight for House, then why should we be sharing the revenue to that extent? So I think there's some things that we have to really consider as we continue to move forward. I'll shut up and be quiet and turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Kevin. Kelly. Oh, Kelly? I'm sorry, Kelly's next.
That's all right. Well, good morning, and thank you for having me. When we worked with the Knight Commission 2 years ago on this report looking at the impact of Title IX if there were a separate collegiate football governing body, looking back at that, it's incredible how much has changed in just 2 years. The report came out about a month before Alston, about 6 weeks before NIL became permissible, and it's just been no secret to anybody in this room, but it's been fascinating as a legal practitioner to watch how things have changed. But from a Title IX standpoint, really not much has changed. Obviously, women's college sports has become even more and more popular to the general population, but the legal framework of Title IX remains what it was when we looked at this issue a few years ago. So our review of whether the NCFA would be subject to Title IX, how Title IX would be implicated with a different collegiate football governing body, was really on a pretty narrow, straightforward questions that were posed to us. And the answers, I think, are pretty straightforward and narrow. There's obviously a lot of different details and questions that would have to be worked out in a model such as this and such a significant change in college athletics. But in terms of legal compliance under Title IX, the first question we looked at is essentially if there was a separate governing body for college for football, for college athletics, how would Title IX apply? And the straightforward answer is it would apply the same way it does now. Member institutions are subject to Title IX under current legal precedent. The governing body itself, the NCAA, under current legal precedent, is not subject to Title IX, but all the member institutions that are educational institutions receiving federal funding are required to comply with Title IX. And so that would be no different if a football program at an FBS institution it remains part of the athletic department, and those student athletes continue at those institutions. There would still be a requirement to comply with Title IX, meaning participation opportunities have to be proportional, financial aid has to be proportional, and the treatment areas, or the laundry list, as sometimes it's called, has to allow for equal opportunities between male sports and female sports and the areas that are regulated by OCR. And so on that broad question, it was a pretty simple and straightforward answer that Title IX would still apply. We also looked at a couple of more specific questions in terms of if the NCFA has different governing rules that would only apply to those schools and that sport that is part of that governing body, then how would Title IX be implicated in that case? And in that case, the answer, I would say, is only slightly less straightforward than the answer to the first question. But again, one, Title IX would still apply, but two, if you have rules that are different for NCFA student athletes, such as scholarship limits, we looked at if there was a medical trust fund, if those rules had some implication of the treatment areas of Title IX, either as they exist right now, or if there were more that were promulgated by OCR, then you would have to have equitable treatment for both men's and women's student athletes. And so looking at, that exists today. There are different rules that for NCAA sports that schools have to comply with, both NCAA rules compliance and Title IX, and there's different rules there's different recruiting rules. For example, there's different scholarship limits for sports as it exists under NCAA rules today. So it would certainly be a shift, but it wouldn't necessarily be all that much different than what we currently have in terms of requirements to comply with federal law and NCAA rules. The two specific questions as to whether there were different rules we looked at were group licensing and a medical trust fund. Both of those could arguably fit in one of the treatment areas now, group licensing potentially in the publicity area, and the medical trust fund in the medical services area. The group licensing was, as I mentioned, this was before NIL became permissive in July of 2021, but it's permitted now, but if there were different rules that football student athletes were subject to, it would be the same legal analysis that if it implicated a treatment area, that there would have to be equitable opportunities and benefits for female student athletes. And I should say that equitable, or when I say equal, that's the term that is used in Title IX, and that does not mean identical. There can be a non-discriminatory justification for there to be differences in spending, differences in the nature of the sport for safety reasons. So it does not have to be the exact same, but ultimately it has to result in student athletes receiving the same benefits and opportunities. And similar to on the medical trust fund, if there was a medical trust fund available to NCFA student athletes, then that could very easily fit within the medical services treatment area and would again be subject to that same analysis of requiring equal benefits for female student athletes subject to any non-discriminatory justification. So I don't mean to oversimplify or say that this would be an easy change in college sports, but at least looking at it from the lens of how would Title IX apply and what would that mean, based on the questions that were presented to us, that was our analysis and the conclusions that we came to.
Good morning, everybody. First and foremost, it's an honor to be invited to this group to provide some comments. I am 0 for 2. I am Damon, not esteemed, for sure. And in this moment, I'm not an expert. I'm not sure there is a living expert for what we're all going through here as we all care deeply about this institution called college athletics. In fact, my kids, several of which are in this business, refer to me as a Neanderthal, not an expert and or esteemed. I can tell you that the invitation to come here today kind of brought me back to my time in South Bend, and my wife Jane and I had spent a number of hours in conversation here as of late, reminiscing of our many, many dinners with Father Ted Hesburgh. Maybe 50 in 8 years. He would call and ask what I was doing or what she was doing. It would either go to her or to me, and we would tell Father that we had this or that or this other activity, and he'd say, "No, you don't. You're going to pick me up in 20 minutes. We're going to dinner." And he would talk incessantly about his commitment to college athletics within higher education, and he would talk about this august group. He was so proud. Now, I didn't, as the framers, Father Hesburgh and Bill Friday, I'd never had the opportunity to meet Bill Friday, but I certainly have learned a great deal about Dr. Friday. But Ted Hesburgh, I got to know incredibly well. And I think if I would kind of succinctly put into a few words what my takeaway from Father Ted was, would have been, protecting college athletics integrity, building in accountability, and maintaining it as a part of the envelope of American higher education. I think that's what he thought his mission and or role was. Amy invited me to this panel several months ago, and my selective hearing, which I'm guilty of, quite frankly, suggested to me that I might be invited to speak about the state of college athletics. Again, not an expert, but an interested observer, and perhaps my non-negotiable position that the academy and college athletics must remain aligned and connected. And that probably comes back to those 50 dinners with Father Ted. And I'm going to go through a pretty quick script here because there's a lot I'd like to say. And as the New York Irish, which is my ancestral background, we can talk for hours and not say a damn thing. So I'm going to try to be a little pointed. The state of college athletics, which was, I thought, one of my charges, is severely broken. And I think everyone in this room would know that, and whoever's online would know that as well. What's happening right now, and the word of the day is it's not sustainable. And that doesn't begin to characterize just how crazy a moment this is, at least for me. A lot of funny money in the system, as I think about it, and I talk to folks almost every day, all day, and I'm working with a group called the Huron Group, and we've got about 40 clients at the moment, and I'm hearing an awful lot about the level of the funny money, which can't continue. We've deregulated ourselves to the point where, the other word of the day, there's no guardrails. There isn't a pro sport entity that can operate in such a deregulated fashion without guardrails. We're the only sporting entity that is without guardrails to this degree. We've lost our ability to function, competitively, operationally, and otherwise. And as it was suggested by Damon with House, there are at least nine NCAA lawsuits, I think, that are currently in play. And Kelly, you could have a better number, but that's as I kind of moved around to some pinnacle players here in anticipation of this conversation. That's the number that I landed on. You know, I find myself in, you know, late at night thinking about how the hell did we get here? You know, this is not what I envisioned, you know, as again, a recovering 38-year athletics director. And again, I'm a recovering practitioner. I'm a franchise operative in the past, but with no legal training. But as I think to myself, how did we get here? I think we went through a period of very permissive legislation. And not that we didn't have the right intent, but we certainly didn't, again, build the apparatus, the guardrails, and the rest of it to kind of support the permissiveness that we kind of thought was appropriate. The other thing I think that I find myself thinking about, we did not have a lot of practitioners in the decision-making practice. You've got a few practitioners on your commission, but as I look to the different boards that have provided oversight for intercollegiate athletics, the Division I or the board of directors at the NCAA level, we really do have an absence of practitioners, and there's some really good practitioners that are recovering practitioners that could participate and be very helpful. People that understand the locker room, the recruiting, all the politics and competing issues around college athletics. I mean, college athletics is really different. It's not corporate, and it's clearly not academics. It's a hybrid. A lot of competing interests. There's, as we all know, there's an insatiable public interest in college sport. It's tribal. It's a sacred American treasure. And quite frankly, to be really pointed, the NIL market, as I know it and understand it and interact with coaches and administrators every day, all day, it seems like, is largely artificial. I'll make that indictment. It's largely artificial. It's a pay-to-play system, and quite frankly, it's a bidding war. And as young people are being recruited, the ante goes up, and it moves. It's amazing. And I think, again, we went into it with really good intention, but we failed miserably, in my opinion. Transfer portal, where do you see graduation rates plummet here? I remember as a younger AD in the 80s and 90s, and you know, and even as I was finishing in 2008, I felt responsible for graduating student athletes and also for providing an experience that provided progress toward a degree. Those were non-negotiable kinds of things that I was responsible for. Today, those things are irrelevant, it seems to me. I don't hear anybody talking about graduation rates or progress towards a degree anymore. Kids are jumping around like crazy. And you got assistant coaches telling kids, you know, your credits will transfer. You're not going to lose an opportunity to continue to be in the pipeline for graduation. And they have no authority, absolutely no authority. The exploitation of the college athlete was alive and well in the 80s and 90s. And where do we hear when kids don't graduate? And Damon, you were involved in those days as well. We were all held to that notion that we had to provide a better experience for young people. And quite frankly, I think as the chaotic system we have right now, we're going to get right back into the same verbiage. It's going to reappear in terms of exploitation. Institutions themselves have been marginalized in the process. You know, as I said, I have a number of my kids in this business, and, you know, they tell me that the institution really no longer matters. You can't, kids today, the recruitment of kids isn't based on institution. It's based on how much, when am I going to get paid, and can you guarantee it? And I mean, it's incredible how this thing's changed. You know, college athletics as part of the academy, you know, I think about this a lot, not to get too pontifical here, but American higher education in our country emulated Western Europe. And you know, once upon a time, I took a course, and then I followed it closely about the history of American higher education. And it's interesting that and by the way, I had an opportunity to befriend one of my peers from Western Europe over the years, and they would kill to have an NCAA system, a parent organization, overlooking really what it is as a club program. It's a glorified club program. They have it at Oxford and Cambridge and Helsinki and Trinity and these other places. So it's interesting that we emulated American higher education in our country, and now they're talking about emulating the way we've packaged and/or connected school and sport. And quite frankly, Asia's doing the same thing, and they've been over to Indianapolis. I know Kevin Lennon's here, and he could probably talk about more of that than I can, but they've studied our system here. So other places around the world are enamored with the system that we have. We have a 107-year history where we've successfully tethered higher education to sport, and it's at risk, in my opinion. We're approaching an irreconcilable position between the academy and college athletics, and that's frightening. Again, as I've already said, the USA model is the envy of the world, and we're the only country in the world with this kind of particular model, highly specialized model. College athletics has done more, I think everyone in this room would know this, for the underrepresented gender equality than just about any other enterprise or social institution since the GI Bill after World War II. We're in ethnic minorities, first generation, and women, female students, have benefited greatly. Most of my unqualified opinions are anecdotal and lack empirical data, I'll grant you that, but they do reflect my 47-year history of coaching and athletics administration around college sport. Futuristically, we need to create and recreate or relaunch the NCAA. And I think we've got a really good leader in Charlie Baker to do just that. And I know there's some modeling going on. NCAA has become way too toxic in its current existence. We perhaps need to resize or right-size the organization by redividing the labor. At the end of the day, we indeed are responsible for providing high-quality experiences for over 500,000 student athletes that are aspirational and earnest. NCAA is very good at conducting championships. Within a reworked NCAA, further federation could easily be designed, enforcement outsourced, not unlike IRS or SafeSport. The establishment of rules and regulations could become the work of the conferences, while Disney-like storytelling could remain a responsibility of the parent organization. And in that particular area, we've all failed miserably. I'm indicting all of us, particularly the people that were the franchise operators, including me. As I stated, I'm not legally trained. However, as the college athletics community figures out outstanding rearview mirror compensation, the next iteration needs to be created in a way, Kelly, with your help and others, so that history doesn't repeat itself a decade from now. My instinct is that those immediate and future opportunities and/or obligations need to be left in the hands of the highly capable legal practitioners and court system. Of course, this moment of change will indeed dictate the future of Team USA. I just completed an 8-year term on the USOPC board, and the aspirations of many elite athletes who represent our country. For 80% of the able-bodied athletes and some 40% of the para-USA team have competed or trained within the NCAA system. Lastly, all of us franchise practitioners, again, operators, not owners, and that's an important distinction, should have been far more progressive, forward-thinking over the past 20 years or more. We needed to be far more anticipatory, is kind of my favorite word for this moment. For as we now move forward with a concept to provide student athletes with access to revenue and/or compensation, we must try like crazy to protect the coveted relationship with the academy. In just a less traditional or perhaps far more contemporary way than we've ever thought we would find ourselves. Not sure this means moving to employee status, collective bargaining, et cetera, although I personally sincerely hope not. Given all of that during these prospective days of dramatic change, I am reminded of the book written by the great American author James Michener entitled Sport in America back in 1976, believe it or not, about college athletics. Because of the dramatic prospective infusion of resource, Michener suggested that college athletics would absolutely take on a corporate mentality. It's amazing that he wrote that in 1976. He surprisingly prognosticated that consortia would be created and that conferences as we once knew them would be outdated. The consortiums, he noted, would negotiate large broadcast property rights and conduct championships. Moreover, Michener indicated that geography and rivalries would be less valued and or not maintained. The future rules of engagement would be tethered to households and market share and the generation of additional revenue. I think if Michener were here today and he wrote a sequel, I believe he would utilize the syntax of the day and he would characterize conference realignment as a derivative of compression state economics, whereby ever-growing resources would be amortized across fewer units, which is the corporate mentality, the corporate model, and that's what we're experiencing. Of course, as they say, all this hindsight is 20/20. As a subsector, in my opinion, and a recovering player in the subsector, we need to protect the vital elements, and in the same breath, prognosticate an effective and legally defendable, Kelly, fair and right future iteration around college sports. And I think that's what the Knight Commission is endeavoring to do.
Kevin, Kelly, Damon, thank you very much for those insightful remarks. At this time, ready or not, we're going to go to some questions, and we'll start with questions from members of the commission. Start with Arnie.
Thanks. I'll ask two questions. One, just very concretely, do you guys respect, push back on our recommendation for FBS leaders to earmark at least half of new and uncommitted revenues to directly benefit the health, safety, education, and well-being of college athletes, such as medical care trust funds? That's a specific question. Second one, if you guys just take quickly, where would you love, if you could wave a magic wand, where would you love us to be 5 years from now? So one concrete, one a little bit more abstract.
Want me to take that first? It's interesting. In my initial thought, first, I do want us to make sure that we're providing the right amount of our revenues towards our student athletes and their overall health, safety, and well-being. I think that's most important. We have to look at those categories. I also think, though, what is quite interesting that I see sometimes is that are our student athletes in certain sports really worried about that as much as getting money in their hands? And that's the challenge. If the House litigation were to, which we typically lose, it seems like all litigation against us in the NCAA, or if we were to settle in some form or fashion to where we got to a revenue share with student athletes, if I went to a student athlete and said, do you want this or do you want that? They're going to want the money in their pockets. So I think that's one of the challenges that we face. So again, trying to share with student athletes the importance of these things such as the medical expenses. That includes mental health. That includes all the things that go along with their well-being, and covering that is something that I think we should do. But how do we balance that with their expectations of also wanting additional dollars? And then if we're giving them those dollars over here, and then we're giving them 50% over here, how are we going to maintain that broad-based sports programming that we have? So short answer, yes, I would like to see more resources given to student athletes that take care of their well-being, but I'm also cognizant of we've got to remind the public, we've got to remind the parents, and we've got to remind the student athletes. And I think Kevin said it. Just to be candid with everyone, when you're sitting down and you're dealing with a student athlete in the sport of football and or basketball right now, and they're coming in, they're telling us what's important to them. When we see student athletes that are transferring from an institution that they're about to graduate from that spring and they want to leave and go to another institution because of the money and the opportunity to play, they're telling us that that education, that degree at that particular institution does not matter. So I think we've got to control the narrative and get people thinking in the right manner if we want to go in that particular direction.
Go ahead.
Maybe I should take this moment and apologize for that elongated monologue, but I did want to say a few things. As relating to relative to the two questions, yes, unequivocally yes, and I agree. And secondly, I agree with Damon. Student athletes today are very savvy consumers. Kids today are really smart, and they do understand what those benefits look like, and quite frankly, they compare experiences within the ecosystem, so that they know what kinds of things they could and should have access to, and they appreciate them, more so than we think.
Arnie, did they answer your question about where you'd like to see them in 5 years from now?
the second part two.
What would I like to see in 5 years? It's interesting. One, I'm very, very hopeful, and I hope I don't have false hopes soon to be swept away. I'm hopeful that we still maintain some sort of educational model. That we have to have that, and we've got to get back control of that narrative, in my opinion. But I do believe 5 years from now, I think we're going to be at a point where we're sharing revenue with student athletes. I'm not one in favor of whether it's an employee-type model, but I think that I would be, and I'm just speaking for myself, is that to think that they're not going to be sharing some of the revenues that we're bringing in, and to the extent that we're bringing those revenues in, we're going to be there. How we divide those revenues up and what they go to, I hope that we can get it to more the well-being of the student athlete moving forward, but I think we're going to be in some sort of revenue share in that college athletics to a certain extent, and will look different. And I will say this, it would not surprise me to see some different type of governance structure in place that separate, if you want to call the Autonomy 5 or the Power 5, out from the current structure that is in place.
Go ahead.
The only thing I would add, and I said it in my monologue, maintaining the connectivity between college athletics and the academy, I think, is absolutely imperative. I think once we find a way for that to not enjoy the full connectivity, I think that's the beginning of the end, at least in my opinion, of college athletics as we know it today. And I don't mean to sound so dire, but that's just an opinion. I was chair not long ago of the NCAA Men's Basketball Committee, and I had a number of our high-profile coaches come to me, and Peter, you were on the committee, come to me privately and say, we need to find a way to pull men's basketball out of the NCAA. We need to operate on our own. We need to have our own czar, our own whatever messaging. We need to control the economics. And by the way, the men's basketball, all in, represents about $1 billion a year unto itself. And so if football takes a walk, totally, I mean, it's a quasi outsourced entity now as of the 1984 ruling, CFA, Oklahoma, Georgia. That was probably one of the moments that I wish we could have replayed within college athletics. Once we let football out, and men's basketball, football went all the way out, and then men's basketball followed, surely women's basketball wouldn't be far behind, and we'd have a very fractured, segmented intercollegiate athletics ecosystem. I don't think that's in the best interest of the enterprise.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is in 5 years, I was a Division II women's golfer at University of Indianapolis, and I hope in 5 years that those opportunities still exist, that for those sports that aren't always on the front page, because my experiences there led to many opportunities that I had and led to what I'm doing now. So I hope that if there is a revenue share model, that it does not eliminate some of those opportunities that we don't always see and hear about.
Just one quick note for a couple of our night commission members who are participating virtually, Eric Barron and Jonathan Alger. We can see you, so if either of you have a question, you can do the raise hand and we'll try to get to you. Thank you.
Great. Our next question will come from one of our commission members, Kim Harmon.
Thank you. Thanks for your comments. Those have been great. The Knight Commission has long recommended that NCAA Division I and CFP boards should include independent directors. In the summer of 2020, we conducted a survey that showed nearly 80% of Division I leaders believe that some members of the NCAA governing boards should be selected to explicitly represent health, safety, and well-being of college athletes. Do you think Division I and CFP governing bodies should have independent directors, and specifically, should they include at least one independent medical expert? And full disclosure, I am a team physician at one of our institutions.
Kevin, why don't you take that?
Yeah, yes, I would think that that's, would be a responsible position to take. And I've already made a pretty significant play for practitioner involvement on any oversight entities. I think that's how we've really lost our way. And if I can digress, I would think about, during my 38-year tenure as an athletics director at a variety of schools, I think I would look to the Camelot years, is when Cedric Dempsey was the executive director of the NCAA and Gene Corrigan was the president from the membership. And we had two high-profile practitioners that really provided, I thought, really good leadership. And it was, I would say it was at that point, at the end of that tag team duo, is we began to lose our way. I think practitioner involvement and expertise involvement on those committees is really important, on all oversight committees.
I would agree. I think having some independent directors involved is significant. One of the words that's always mentioned in our industry is transparency. If we don't have anything to hide, we need to bring individuals from the outside that could give us a different take on what we're doing. I also think from a medical perspective, I'm always fascinated. We talk about health, safety, and well-being of student athletes. And for one, and again, can't speak for every institution across the landscape, but that's something that we've always held at the forefront. But there's this narrative out there in our industry that we don't take care of student athletes. And that's what's gotten us to where we are. And I think in some cases, rightfully so. I think there are institutions that have had some challenges that lack the necessary resources to be able to do the things that need to be done. When you take a look at those of us that are in the Power Five, I would speak and say that the majority of us have those resources to take care of those student athletes. But I do believe sometimes that the manner in which and the approach that we take might not always be the best, and that's why we need outside experts to help us in that decision-making process. I also believe that those outside experts can also help us better control the narrative of what actually is taking place, because sometimes I hear things out there in the public and whether it's up on the Hill that people are saying that just aren't true. So having that outside help, having more transparency, I think lends itself to us better positioning our organization as we move forward.
Derek?
Hi, thank you guys for all being here and appreciate the comments. Just going back to the presentation, you know, as we showed earlier in the slides, the CLA analysis revealed that there are 9 schools today that already spend more than the 11 head and assistant football coaches, than all the athletic scholarships and medical expenses. If the current spending continues, you know, we'd see that almost half the public autonomy institutions will hit that crossover point. Number one, what are your thoughts on that analysis? And then what do you think FPS leaders need to do to change the spending patterns and redirect the new and uncommitted revenues as we move forward?
I apologize for jumping back in. I can't help myself. But, you know, I think there's a real misnomer out there about who's in charge. And, you know, I worked at 6 institutions as an athletics director. And at every institution, they were upwardly mobile. They all had sights on being somebody other than who they were. And it's amazing how major benefactors and/or it translates into perhaps trustees and senior administration want to fulfill that upward mobility aspiration. And so I laugh at people who are in my ear and tell me about this operator or that operator. Can you believe they extended that contract or they made that decision? They're not made at the operator's level. You know, we should have a night commission for the people that are the owners. We shouldn't, it shouldn't just be a night commission for the operators. It's quite a distinction, at least for me, having been in that environment, in a fairly high-profile environment at a couple schools. And so for me, I think that's the realization of who's making those calls is really important, and understanding a lot of what we're talking about is political. It's not economic. Your study, your CLA study and the rest of it, I don't know if it's accurate or not. I've talked to some people that say those numbers are overstated. I don't know if they are or not. That's not my expertise. But I do know the exercise is more political than economic and/or philosophical. And so I think coming to grips with where these decisions are made, a lot of us, I'm assuming in this room, are fairly conservative about these issues. Coming to grips with the reality of how the political nature of college athletics, I said before, it's highly politicized. And schools are upwardly mobile. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to be up on the next rung up on the ladder. And so intercollegiate athletics, one more digression. For me, 2.5 years out of the seat as an AD, it's never looked more to me like it's a bifurcated entity. One side of the equation is providing the very best student-athlete experience we can provide for some 500,000 student-athletes. I mean, that's what we signed up for, and a lot of us really love that, believe it, live it. And then the other 50% of the equation, the bifurcated 50%, is institutional advancement. I kind of said that in the monologue. And it's branding, it's marketing, it's rankings, it's enrollment, it's university development, not necessarily athletics development. It's all of that. Those are vital, they're critical. And so athletics has kind of got the experiential side and a student and an institutional advancement dimension to it. And I think a lot of people that are not in the play don't understand the power of the institutional advancement side and how it plays out and who really makes those decisions, what we think are outlandish and ridiculous and crazy. But that's how they happen.
Just to add to that, that intersection that was shown on the graph, I remember when I first saw it, it was interesting. I happen to be one of those institutions, part of an institution in the Power Five that we're not even close to that at this time. And I was telling Amy that and Sandy, and I chuckle. But I do believe this, that with the new CFP revenues that are potentially coming in and the numbers that we're given, with the new media rights agreements that conferences are coming up with, when you see the football coaches' salaries now exceeding $10 million a year in the payouts that institutions are making, I should have been a football coach. I think I made the wrong decision. But it's interesting. I do believe, and that's why I'm going back to the revenue share. There's just no way that we can continue to do the things that we are doing and thinking that it's going to be okay to continue to move forward. So I think in the model that Amy shared and Sandy talked about, designating some of that new revenue towards the student-athlete well-being is going to be crucial in order to slow that intersection down. But I also think at the same time, which I've stated earlier, that I believe that revenue sharing will become a part of what we do. That's going to slow that intersection down. I also say this. I used to be one of those ADs and administrators that would say that we don't have the money to do that. I can tell you at the University of Maryland, it's challenging to make the ends meet. But a student athlete might look at us and say, just reallocate the funds. Make a decision what you want to spend the money on. And I've come to grips with that. We've made decisions to spend money on certain things that have gotten us into the trouble that we're in today. Now, is it going to be easy to change the mindset of how we move forward? No, but we can change that mindset. And I want to say this is intercollegiate athletics, we do have a lot of challenges before us. But if you talk to the majority of our student athletes, their problems have arisen in football and basketball. And football and basketball has impacted everything else that we do, this idea of broad-based sports programming. I don't have the field hockey student athlete coming to me talking about their experience is bad and they need to make more money. And if you sit down and talk to the majority of our programs, they're in a good state. But it's the two or three that have really fundamentally changed the landscape of what we do, and now it's sifting on down. And one of the things that I worry about is what Kelly said. Can we continue to move forward? Can we share revenue? Can we do all these things and maintain broad-based sports programming?
Next question comes from Amy.
Thanks for being here. I appreciate the dialogue. So we've heard actually a lot of comments just today about, I think, general like philosophical alignment with the care model that the Knight Commission has developed around transparency, health and safety, and spending more money on health and education and safety issues for student athletes, independent oversight, et cetera. Talked a little bit about the role of institutions to do that, and you just mentioned that, Damon, the mindset is probably the biggest obstacle at this point in time. But what role do, if any, do conferences have, particularly at the FBS level, to help amplify or promote the commitment to change and action to get towards a place where we're talking about it and actually implementing that in practice?
Want me to go first, Kevin, or Kelly?
Go ahead, Dan. Yeah, have at it.
I don't have all the answers. I just have opinions. It's interesting in our business. I think conference commissioners are some of the most powerful people in our industry and carry a lot of weight as we continue to move forward. As I look at it, I think conferences can help us better position ourselves moving forward. When we look at, if you take something like the Big Ten, the majority of our revenue at an institution like the University of Maryland comes from the Big Ten. The distribution that we receive is significant, and it's only going to grow. Should there be some thoughts there about how that revenue coming from the Big Ten is actually distributed and where that money goes? Because right now, there are no parameters on that money coming into us as an institution. We receive those dollars, and we do what we want with those dollars. I don't know from a legal perspective, Kelly, if there's something that the Big Ten can say, you have to earmark so much for X, Y, and Z that comes from our distribution to you. Would that be helpful as we continue to move forward? I think it would be. And I also think it would provide a little bit more uniformity if we all had to kind of do some of the same things with those dollars that come through. Some of my colleagues may disagree with me and say, no, I want to have complete control of what we do. But maybe this helps to maintain or get us back to some sort of level playing field. We utilize that term level playing field a lot. I always tell our staff, while we have rules and regulations to try to level the playing field is not completely level because there are some institutions that just have things that others don't have. But I do believe that the conference can step in and help us right-size ourselves a little bit.
I have one thing to add on that one, Amy, is I've been at a couple of institutions where there was real pushback on providing special services and considerations for student athletes, that they wanted student athletes treated like the general population. Well, quite frankly, if you did this for a living, you would know very quickly student athletes are different. They have different needs, and to try to accommodate them in a kind of an egalitarian kind of mentality is really difficult. So if conferences would gather and produce an imperative that we all need to kind of move in a direction, I think that does help those institutions that are maybe a little bit more yesterday, if not just ridiculously conservative. Student athletes are different. The kinds of experiences student athletes realize in college athletics are, whether you like it or not, it may be arrogant on my part, but they are different than the experiences they can get anywhere else on campus. And I think they need a certain level of treatment and consideration that would relate to that.
I just for my clarification, when we talk about conferences, are we agreeing that the conferences are made up of presidents and chancellors who are actually making the decisions with respect to the policies around the conferences? Because we have this notion that there's a conference, and I think some people are thinking it's the commissioner, when in reality, the commissioner is facilitating a discussion amongst the membership, and the board of the conference are the presidents and chancellors. So I just want to make sure that when you think about that, are you speaking in terms of those folks? Because Kevin, you've talked about how important the practitioners are, and they're not always the presidents and chancellors, but I'm just curious as to how you feel like that relationship is right now.
Peter, and a great question. In that scenario, the chancellors and presidents are the owners, and the commissioners, the operative, is the operator. But so clearly those decisions are being made and should be made. And by the way, when they're made in a group setting, it does have an impact on the entire group.
The only thing I would add, and I don't pretend to be an antitrust lawyer, so I won't give any opinions on that, but when we looked at the concept of an NCFA and the Title IX implications, I think one of the natural concerns or pushback is it would just continue to perpetuate more and more money going to some of the sports that may result in gender inequality, and but having these conversations now and being thoughtful about, can you put designations on spending and restrictions that hopefully prevent that? Because from a Title IX standpoint, the source of the funds doesn't matter. So you have to spend those funds still in an equitable manner that results in equitable treatment for those. You don't have to spend them the same, but whether it's from the CFP or it's from a loan or it's from student fees, the source of those funds still have to comply with Title IX.
Jacques, you have a question?
Yes. First off, Damon, good to see you again. I was an intern for Damon 10 years ago when he first got to the University of Maryland while I was in the NFL, so appreciate your kindness and glad to see you having success. My question is, with the recent focus and attention given to playing roles to protect the safety of football players and the integrity of the game, should this be a moment the CFP uses its revenue to earmark funds that address these issues for all teams, such as, paying for coach-player electronic communication through modern helmets?
Wow, we got something going on in the Big Ten right now that's pretty challenging, to say the least.
We won't name any teams. We won't name any teams. We're just a question. Just a question.
I'm looking forward to tomorrow because we have a big game on the slate. But I always want to make sure, yes, the answer is yes. I think we should earmark some of those funds. And it's interesting having gone through this the past month or what have you, and talking about how do we get ourselves out of even being in a position that something like this happens. And if you do utilize the technology in the helmet, I think it's the right thing to do moving forward. I think that we will get there at some point in time, but I think there's a whole slew of other things that you didn't even mention that I think that we should earmark dollars to address that. And what we've done is we've left ourselves open to have these types of situations happen, and then people just take a look at us again and they throw their hands up and say they can't even control themselves. They can't put rules in place. And so anything that we can do in earmarking dollars that is going to better position football moving forward, just like all of our other sports, would be the right thing to do.
Judy?
Thank you, everyone. If you'll allow me, I'll actually ask two questions. The first question is for Kelly, and that is in relations to the NCAA's commitment to gender equity. And yet we know that the $150 million distribution for March Madness goes just to men's teams, not to women's teams. So how do we bridge the value statement with the actual practice, number one? And I recognize that the NCAA per se is not subject to Title IX. So that's the first question to Kelly. And maybe this to Damon and Kevin. And Damon, you mentioned that you thought that in 5 years, the Power Five would secede for everything. I lived my career in the Power Five, and now I happen to be in a wonderful mid-major. The values of the mid-majors and the practices in the mid-majors actually represent, Kevin, your glorious view of what college athletics should be. It's still there, and some of them are very competitive, and yet the entire discussion nationally, everywhere, is about that sliver of the Power Five, even though most of the 500,000 student athletes are not the Power Five. So how do we get the discussion, the values back into the Power Five without necessarily seceding? Because there is some value in championships across these two levels. So those, maybe Kelly, you start.
So even if the NCAA itself isn't subject to Title IX, most of, if not all of its member institutions are, and those member institutions are the ones that are voting on rules and giving input into how the legislation works. So there's, while there could potentially be a gap in those values, it's really the member institutions that have to close that. And then to Damon's point, it goes back to the hard decision-making on reallocation of funds and incentivizing in a performance fund for talking about men's basketball. If women's sports, or if women's basketball has a similar model for revenue distribution, that's going to incentivize more investment in women's basketball across the board, and hopefully for women's sports. So I think it just comes back to the decisions, the intentional decisions that have to be made by member institutions.
I'll take a stab at that second question there, Judy. You know, and I mentioned the fact that 5 years from now, the potential of Power Five moving on or some different type of governance structure. And I think what has happened, I agree wholeheartedly. Broad-based sports programming is what we've been built on, and I think that is great. It's interesting. Sandy and I were talking about you could have one institution that has much more money than the other institution, and the one that has less money is winning. Student athletes are competitive. I think we've seen across the sports world and professional sports, you could have the team with the highest payroll, but they don't always win the championship. But I think what we've allowed to happen is this. Because the focus has been on the focus has been on two sports that have impacted everything else that we do. And that has been unfortunate, because what we're seeing in those sports, it's very, very interesting. If you're sitting on campus, you don't have the lacrosse player coming in and saying, how much you gonna pay me? You don't have the lacrosse parents coming in and saying, we need more. It's very rare that I face that. But when it comes to, if you go back years and years, I think there was a basketball student athlete at one institution that says he wasn't getting enough food. And he was on full scholarship, and he didn't have, and then that just started triggering everything. So what society has done, and everyone's looking at, is we got to pay these guys. We got to pay these ladies. Well, this is not professional sports. It's easy if you have one franchise, and all the money comes in, and that franchise just takes care of those associated with it. But in our world, the money that's made off of football and basketball, it has to take care of 20, 25, 30 different sports. And that's what people have missed in society. So all these people that said, we need to pay, it's impacting those too, which in the long run may impact how we look and get us away from what we were set up to be. And that's providing opportunities for young men and young women to compete at this level and have a good time. I am hopeful that whatever this new model, because I do believe there's going to be a change. And when I say that, I don't say that in a form of fashion if the Power Five moved away for some reason, that you can't still have competition amongst everyone. The reason I say that is because if you're going to be the ones at the end of the day paying the freight for everything, there are those out there that are saying if we're going to pay the freight, then why should we not control how much revenue comes in if we're going to pay that freight? And that's so when you take a look at the CFP model, if all of a sudden basketball was to go in the same situation, it totally changes what we look like. So we're going to have to figure out that balance.
Judy, I have just a couple thoughts. Pam, you and I worked for a great president, Dick Broadhead, once upon a time, and he loved the word soundings. And so I would tell you in anticipation of this conversation for the last couple of weeks, I went around the ecosystem and took the soundings of a lot of Pinnacle players, at least I thought I did. Some of you I didn't call, I apologize, I should have called you, but I didn't get to all of you. But in any event, there are a number of models being created. It's become a cottage industry, I've learned. And some, I've been sworn to secrecy, confidentiality. I can't even speak. I actually sat in a room and listened to a model. So there's no end to the number of models right now that are being created, the next iteration, what it might look like. So that's alive and well. But a number of the models talk about, again, Judy, to your question about mid-majors, Division II, Division III, and the rest of the universe, they talk about leaving and taking all resources with them, which would just absolutely destroy Team USA, the college athlete experience for the 500,000 student athletes. And for somebody like me, that is devastating. That's beyond devastating. That's nuclear. And I don't know if they can get there. But I worry about it. And as pejorative as perhaps I've been in some of my comments, you know, we've got non-practitioners minding the toy store. I mean, we got a lot of problems here. And I think it's largely political, as I've said, but you asked a very pointed question. Why is all the emphasis on the Power Five? We've done a horrible job of storytelling, horrible job about the experiences kids are having and characterizing how life-changing some of those experiences have been. And I look to whatever iteration is next. Somebody's got to become more Disney-like, as I tried to use the expression in my monologue.
I have
I think-
one point of
Go ahead.
one point of clarification as well from Judy's president at Quinnipiac, the reigning Division I men's hockey champion. So I wanted to point that out
Yes.
as well.
We,
What's going to happen in the future if we have such separation?
Yeah, nuclear, horrible.
we have a question from one of our virtual participants, Eric Barron.
Thanks. Thanks, Len. And first of all, I want to say that I've hired 2 athletic directors in my time as president of Florida State and at Penn State. One was Stan Wilcox and one was Sandy Barber, and both of them are children of Kevin White. And so I am sorry that I am not there to shake your hand and tell you how much I appreciated the fact that I got a chance to hire individuals with such high standards and such good advice. I'm really I'm a true fan of what the Knight Commission is proposing. And I listened carefully to the discussion about the decision makers and this sort of bifurcation. And I just want to point out that that I do not believe individual presidents can pull this off. Despite very good intentions, the combination of donors, other fans, including students and boards, make it very difficult to I think just stand up and decide in this space. It needs to be a collective of presidents, and even the collective of presidents is difficult. I've watched in the conferences that I've participated in the best of intentions, and then when another conference does something different, everybody folds their cards and goes back to whatever is the general story. I personally, in watching it, I think NIL and the excesses are driven by the donors more than anything else, and the students are just taking advantage of the fact that this sort of competitive buy your way in there is something that the donors just step in there right in the middle of it and work to get just as much money as they possibly can because they want to win, and it is part of this tribal enterprise. So I just believe very strongly that this isn't a school has to do the right thing because the pressures are too broad and too great and from too many different directions. This really has to be a whole group of presidents and perhaps a conference that can lead in this particular space to sit there and make the decision to do this and stick with it, regardless of what else is going on there in the space. And I think that is really the difficult part, is to be able to have sufficient mass of presidents who can make the decision and stick with it if we're going to change things. Thanks.
Can I just respond to that? Because I think it's a very, very good point when I start thinking about our business and some of the things that happen. I think there are a lot of times that administrators, presidents, we go in with the right intentions. And then we have board of trustees, board of governors that get involved, which are our donors, our boosters, our alums, that then somehow magically change the direction that we want to go in. And I'm going to give a couple of examples, but not name institutions. You know, there are times when I've seen some of my colleagues wanting to let a coach go because of a particular FBI investigation or things of that nature. But that coach is so successful, and then all of a sudden, that AD is ridiculed. And it's interesting, in this particular case, and some of you will know what I'm talking about, the AD gets fired, the coach is kept, and then maybe 2 or 3 years later, oh yeah, the AD was right. So they now fire the coach, and then they fired another coach and go out and do those things. And what's happening, and I talk to colleagues about it, you sit down and we say we want to do one thing, but we've allowed donors, alums, boosters to really control, and it becomes a decision, unfortunately for some, about your own job security. So then you end up making a decision that you did not want to make because of your own job security, or you come out and say things because you want to appease the base. And I think that's where we've kind of gotten lost in our industry. I wish there was a way that we can come together, but we come together and we talk about this is what we're going to do, but then when it happens on our individual campus, we change our tune, and that's something we are going to have to figure out.
Thank you, Damon. I think at this point in time, we have time for one more question. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Len. I appreciate it. And I really appreciate all the comments that have been made. Kevin, your comment about being more Disney-esque and telling the story. The challenge is that old, I think it was Sam Spade, one of the guys, Humphrey Bogart's character says, when man bites dog, when dog bites man, that's not news, but when man bites dog, that's news. And so the tantalizing part of what's happening at not just the power, well, is it a power 5? Maybe it's a power 2, another 2, and then everybody else. But whatever you call it, that's tantalizing. That captures headlines. Number 2, the comment about the quest to move up. It's truly an American thing to want to get better. And how we say better, and I'm a former university president and a trustee member, and now a senior, I've sort of seen it in all different levels. It is not bad to want to get better, but the cost of getting better is shaking the system to its core. I just want to acknowledge that. So nobody gets upset when they say, we want to go to R2 to R1. And Howard University might be the first HBCU to be in R1. We just changed the Carnegie classifications, by the way, which is a cool thing. We're going to celebrate that day, right? So I just want to, I mean, these are things we're kind of messing with in our sort of our, how we understand progress. I mean, I'm a Harvard graduate. Yale wants to be Harvard. They'll never be that, but, they're trying. Business school graduate. But that was a little slap, little snap on the Bulldogs there. But my question is specific, though, for Damon in particular. The rev share piece, can you do a rev share and not have student athletes, football and men's basketball, probably more than likely, become employees? Can that needle be threaded? Because you seem to be pretty, sincere about the comment about the rev share, but I don't know if you can do that, and maybe they do become become employees, and that's okay, but I was just curious what you're thinking.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to take a step. First of all, I think we're already in a form of pay for play. I think we're kidding ourselves because the collectives, in my opinion, are a form of pay for play. So we've kind of gotten around it by going this route. As far as can we thread that needle and not have them be employees, obviously I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know that. I'm going to ask Kelly if she would know. But I do think when I take a look at Alston money, we've taken Alston money, we've assigned it as an academic incentive. So are there ways in which if there's revenue coming in and we said that we were going to share X number, we made it permissive legislation, and that we were going to share and that you could share it from doing X, Y, or Z and assigning it to certain things so it doesn't look as if it's a paycheck, then maybe we can thread that, but I'm not sure. But I just believe that somehow, some way, we're going to have to get to that point in time because I don't see how we're going to maintain where we are. If we're talking about, if those numbers are right with the CFP, if that number, I can't remember what it was, $2 billion, and then you start talking about a Big Ten with $1 billion, and then 6 or 7 years from now, what if one day that certain schools and conferences decide to aggregate and go to the market, that number is going to even be bigger? I just don't think that we can continue to increase and not do something. But I'll turn to Kelly. She may know better from a legal perspective.
I'll give a very lawyerly answer. It depends. Depends on the facts. But I mean, I think that fear is real in some of the revenue share legislation that you see in states, or even some of the federal legislation where it's explicitly saying this model will not result in employee status. And so there's obviously a concern that the people proposing that legislation feels like needs to be handled through legislation versus through a regulatory or court case.
Marty?
Damon, I just want to probe or go back to your earlier point, which I thought is just so important on people come in wanting to do the right thing and then get in that hot seat, and it's difficult. And we know there's all kinds of brokenness with the NCAA, structural issues. But what you're talking about isn't something that can be legislated away, or Congress can't fix that. It's sort of moral leadership among presidents and boards of trustees to do the unpopular thing or do the courageous thing or not chase the dollar. I'm just wondering, is that a fairy tale? From the outside looking in, it seems, why can't they do that? But I'm not in that hot seat. So is that possible? Can we better train presidents, better train boards to make the moral correct choice rather than the easy one or the fiscally beneficial choice? Or is that pie in the sky and not realistic?
Well, in the example I was mentioning, this particular individual, he made the right decision. It cost him his job. And so
He did, but his bosses didn't.
his
So
bosses, his bosses didn't. And I think, Arnie, I think that's a challenge. I think it's going to be a significant challenge for us moving forward. I see it every day with my colleagues in sitting in a room, and we're all in agreement. We all, we've got to stop spending so much money on X, Y, and Z. We've got to make sure that we keep these rules. And then the pressures at the institution just become so significant that you got to side. Not going to mention anything in particular that's happening today, but you see comments come out that you're positioning yourself with your crowd. Well, I haven't heard a statement from Damon. Why isn't Damon coming out defending such and such? And then people will come out, you better make a statement or they're going to run you out of here. So, Artie, I think it's going to be very, very, very challenging for presidents and ADs to the greatest extent to really step up and do those things. I do believe that, I don't know from, when we say trying to get legal help with certain things, I think sometimes we want that legal help or we want legislation passed and certain things, like you just said this, you can't legislate, but we want that so we don't then have to make the decision. And if we don't have to make that decision because it's legislated, or it comes from a legal perspective, then we have cover. But to answer your question short, I think it's going to be very challenging.
Arnie, may I take a shot at it? I don't know that I can say it any better than Damon, but I spoke about the politicization of college athletics and the ecosystem. It's never been more political. It's so ironic that, at least for me, that things that are transpiring these days, if you would have been engaged in that activity 20 or 25 years ago, you would have lost your career. Now, if you don't do it, you're going to lose your career. Yes. And by the way, and I have family members that are hazed because they're not as aggressive in some of these new paradigms as perhaps they should be. It's crazy what you once, if you did it years ago, you would have lost your whole profession. Now, if you don't do it, you may lose your profession. Anyway, that's enough of that. The political realities are enormous. It's a bird's nest. And so, Arnie, to kind of prepare presidents, chancellors, board chairs, and trustees and others, they have to understand the extent of the politics. And I think that's what, and as I said earlier, I tried to say it, and I listened to Amy and Todd carefully on a call here recently. This whole exercise is not economic, isn't about economics, and it isn't about practicality. It's about politics. This is a political exercise. And so you've got to train people to be aware of those political realities and how to create narratives to survive, because the politics are not going to go away.
Well, unfortunately, we've reached the end of our session. Let me thank our panelists for extraordinary participation and information. I think you guys were great, and we're all the better for what you've been able to contribute. And how fitting that my co-chair Arnie Duncan got the last question in, because before we conclude this session, I want to recognize Arnie. Arnie's completed the maximum 8 consecutive years of service as a Knight Commission member, serving as co-chair for 7 of those years. And obviously before joining the Knight Commission and during his leadership as U.S. Secretary of Education, Arnie helped propel the NCAA's 2011 adoption of one of the Commission's cornerstone recommendations, that teams be on track to graduate at least half of their players to be eligible for postseason play and championships. And that NCAA policy, really, that change has helped lead to record high graduation rates for D1 athletes. So, Arnie, thank you for your leadership, tremendous leadership, as I might characterize it. So I think you deserve a round of applause. And a reminder for the media that we're going to hold a press conference at 12:30 today, and the recording of this session will be available on our website by tomorrow morning. Any members of the media who have not yet registered may do so by accessing the link on the Knight Commission website. So thank you all for joining us today.